We're continuing our series on learning from the pandemic. After the past 2 decades had seen a resurgence of cities worldwide, COVID is prompting people to flee congestion and the virus. They're decamping to suburban and rural areas. How will those areas cope? Our speakers include Richard Fry, a senior researcher at the Pew Research Center, who is on top of the demographic changes underway in cities and suburbs. June Williamson is a department chair and associate professor at City College of New York's Spitzer School of Architecture. She's the author of the soon-to-be-released Case Studies in Retrofitting Suburbia, which built on an earlier book on the topic. And Brian O'Looney is a principal at Torti Gallas and Partners, and author of Increments of Neighborhood. He's done work overseas and can compare US suburbs to those in Australia, Turkey, and other locales. We'll hear from our speakers, then have plenty of time for Q&A. If you have a question, raise your Zoom hand, the little green button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll give the microphone to you. You can also put a question into the Q&A text function. And please tweet today at #NPFSuburbs. Before we start with our presentations, I'd like to introduce and welcome Benjamin Teta from the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the United States, our partner on this program. Benjamin is from Ghana. He's based out of New York and does a lot of freelancing on UN and other African issues. So Benjamin, just a quick hello for you and the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris. And well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you. I'm really pleased to join you all for today's discussion. So just a quick one to say on behalf of the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents, we are excited to partner the National Press Foundation for today's event. At the Foreign Press Correspondents Association, we always strive to make foreign correspondents here in the US feel at home and to do their work. And we are glad for the continued support we're receiving from our members across the globe. Well, with that, I will say thank you all, and I look forward to today's discussions.
Okay, thank you very much, Benjamin. And as I said, we'll be getting to Q&A later. In the briefing, I do notice from the registrations, we have lots of folks from around the world. From the registrants I looked at a little bit ago, we have folks from Nigeria, South Sudan, the UK, Bangladesh, Singapore, Malaysia, Egypt, and several other locales. So welcome to all of you, and we're looking forward to the discussion. But first, I want to, turn it over to Richard Fry of the Pew Research Center. He is going to talk about some of the demographic changes underway in cities and suburbs around the US. And so Richard, welcome. Tyler, in the background, if you could have Richard's slideshow come up. But Richard, I'll turn this over to you right now.
Thank you, Chris. Delighted to be able to participate in today's event. I'm going to sort of lay the groundwork on changing demographics and economic trends in the nation's suburbs, sort of pre-pandemic. And to keep it short, you're going to see one area where I think America's suburbs have been very successful. Then I'm going to talk about sort of some of the demographic headwinds that I think they are facing. But I will sort of end my remarks on a somewhat positive note. Next slide, please. Okay, just to sort of get our definitions down, I'm going to focus on what I call our large suburban counties. These are 370 outlying counties in the nation's 52 largest metro areas. They surround sort of 68 urban core counties. Think of the urban core as sort of the central cities or sort of the urban central counties that make up the metro area. And then the large suburban counties are those that sort of surround them. And under this classification, what we see is that in 2018, 83 million Americans lived in our 370 large suburban counties. That's about 1/4 of the US population. And notice, sort of going back in time, back in 1970, these same 370 counties were 1 out of 5 Americans, or about 20%. And so the large suburban counties are not only growing in population and absolute numbers, so to speak, they're growing in population share or market share. They are attracting a rising fraction of the nation's population. As opposed to that, if we look at our urban core counties, notice that since 1980, yeah, they've been, in terms of totality, they've been gaining population, but as a share of the population, they're sort of stuck at about 31%. Most of the gains of the large suburban counties have been sort of at the expense of rural America, but clearly a growing share of the population has been attracted to living in our outlying suburban counties. Next slide, please. So that's a sort of a sense of clearly sort of unmitigated success is population growth. But now in this slide, we're going to sort of start to unpack sort of the demographic changes. And sort of what we sort of see comparing the large suburban counties to our urban core central cities is since 2000, in the new century, the large suburban counties have gained 17 million people. But let's sort of break it down. Which age groups are the suburbs picking up? Well, what we see is among children 0 to 17, much more growth in suburbia than in the urban core. Young adults, 18 to 24-year-olds, again, a lot more growth out in the burbs than in the urban core. Now go to the far end of the age spectrum, go to the nation's senior citizens, the 65 plus population. Again, the large suburban counties are gaining more than the urban core. All of America is aging, but especially the nation's large suburban counties. As opposed to that, suppose we go to sort of the 25 to 44-year-old population. This is a population that's largely done with their schooling. Many of them are focused on full-time work. And this is a little bit of a beauty and the beholder, but for many of us, they're not at their highest earning years, but in some ways they might be working the longest hours. They might be at their most creative phase, and they might be, again, working and they're most productive. This is sort of the prime working age years. And what we see here is that at least since 2000, the urban core has attracted that prime working demographic to 25 to 44s, not the large suburban counties. That's the one demographic that they've been lagging. So in demographic terms, what we sort of see, the picture I'm painting is, as a general statement, the large suburban counties, they're gaining people, but relative to the urban core, they're gaining at the ends of the age spectrum. A lot of children and young adults, 18 to 24s, a lot of seniors, but not the folks sort of in their prime working years. And so this has implications. That growth of children and the 18 to 24s, that means they need a lot of schools, a lot of colleges. A lot of 65 plus means you need a lot of senior centers and a health infrastructure. And so that young demographic and that old demographic, this is what we often think of as more dependent populations. And so what I'm sort of saying is the suburbs are growing, but they're growing at the ends of the age spectrum, populations, age groups that are not particularly vigorous, so to speak, in terms of working activity. And this is going to create some fiscal stresses for our nation's suburbs. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but because it doesn't especially fit into my narrative I'm weaving, but it is true that everywhere in America, we are becoming a more racially and ethnically diverse country, i.e. we're becoming less white. That's happening everywhere, but it's especially happening in the nation's large suburban counties. In 2000, more than 3/4 of the population was non-Hispanic white, 77%. That's now down to 66%. So more than 1 out of 3 suburbanites is a racial ethnic minority or not white. What have been the big growing groups? All the major racial ethnic minorities, Hispanics, African Americans, as well as Asians, all of them have been suburbanizing. The real big gainers, notice that Hispanic Americans, they used to be 8% of the suburban population. They've almost doubled their share to 15%. Asian Americans were 4%, now they're 7%. They've almost doubled. African Americans have been suburbanizing as well. Their share has gone from 10 to 13%. Now, what's going on in the urban core? Well, it's now less than a majority of the urban core is white. It's down to 44%. But in terms of how much diversification has happened, there's actually been more diversification this century among the large suburban counties than there has been among the urban core. In terms of change, it fell 11 percentage points in the large suburban counties, but it's only down 8 percentage points in the urban core counties. So all of America is diversifying, especially the nation's large suburban counties. Sort of winding up here, in terms of, now I'm going to sort of turn to sort of the economic trends that we see in suburban counties. And time-wise, I'm going to sort of have to roll through this relatively quickly, and you'll have to, I'm not going to have slides for everything, but here's the sort of observations I would make regarding the economic changes of how the suburbs are faring relative to the central cities. Basically, what we see when we look at economic outcomes is that, as a general statement, the large suburban counties in their economic outcomes, they've been sort of lagging what's been happening in the central cities this century. Let's just sort of roll through some examples. What fraction of the adult population, the working age population, is working? Well, again, because the suburbs have a growing 65 plus population, many of whom are retired, a smaller share of the suburban population is working than it was back in 2000. Not so in the urban core. Rising shares of the adult population in the urban core counties are working. A well-known example is, poverty has grown as a result of 2 recessions in America over the past 18 years. But where has poverty grown the most? Poverty has grown the most in our large suburban counties, not the urban core or rural areas. Poverty is up in America, but it's especially up in suburbia. Another example, let's look at average household incomes. Average household incomes in suburbia, they've fallen since 2000. As opposed to that, in the urban core, average household incomes have been rising. So on any number of economic outcomes, what we sort of see is that the suburban areas are lagging the gains that have occurred in the urban core. And finally, here's an example where it's sort of most startling. What about the value of property in suburbia versus the urban core? This shows it for the various regions, but the regions all demonstrate the same pattern. And what I'm going to use as an example is look over to the left at sort of home values in the Northeast region of the United States. What was the value of relative property in the suburbia Northeastern versus the urban core cities up in the Northeast? Well, back in 2000, the light green bars, property was more valuable in suburbia than it was in the urban core. $319,000 on average in the large suburban counties versus $269,000 in the central cities. In the Northeast, at least, property values have appreciated both in suburbia and the urban core. But again, the gains have been much greater in the urban core than has happened in suburbia. And so now the relationship is flipped. Now property is more valuable in the urban core up in the Northeast than it is in the suburban areas. And so this general pattern, you'll see this no matter which region you pick, most areas property is appreciated, but it's appreciated much more in the central cities than it has in the suburban areas. And so this is again an indicator of sort of the economic gains that the central cities have made. I said I was going to finish up on a positive note, but the one way in which, after sort of saying that I think suburbs have been lagging, what I'm going to point out here is that in terms of sort of thinking forward about after the pandemic, what we might see, effectively, what this slide shows is that it's become increasingly expensive for families to afford to live in urban core counties. In many areas, simply property has gotten very unaffordable in the urban cores, increasingly so relative to suburbia. And so I suspect that at least in terms of home affordability, that's going to underlie greater population gains going forward out in suburbia. So housing affordability suggests that, the wind may be in the sails for suburbia in terms of future population gains. Those are some brief remarks laying the landscape, and now I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you.
We had one question come in and another, and it's tied to a question I wanted to ask. And that's kind of the post-pandemic world. I mean, a lot of us have been reading stories about the COVID exodus that's been underway from big cities. I saw the latest one just a couple days ago, quote, "I'm living in a COVID-free world just a few hundred miles from Manhattan." It was about people heading to Nova Scotia, more rural than suburban, but the same theme has been played out in stories about people leaving New York, London, and Paris, many of the original COVID hotspots. I'm just wondering, what do we know about how real this is, or is this just a trendy blip? And do we have any information about home values in the suburbs? That's a question that came in from one of our viewers.
Okay. I would say we certainly have quite a bit of anecdotal evidence on this. And it probably varies from metropolitan area to metropolitan area. Clearly, the New York metropolitan area, for a variety of reasons, gets a tremendous amount of attention. In terms of sort of, as you see, what I rely on, which is sort of hard and fast population numbers coming out of the US Census Bureau, we will not have July 1, 2020 estimates. We will not have, at the earliest, maybe they'll start to surface next May. So in terms of sort of what I consider sort of hard and fast evidence on whether we've seen a shift in population, I would say we simply don't know. Now, having said that, clearly, if you follow housing markets and what you hear among the nation's realtors is, in terms of both foot traffic as well as sales, there may be indeed some evidence of this sort of shift of professionals from the urban core out to suburbia. But again, I still sort of consider that preliminary evidence, not hard and fast.
Okay. So we're going to move on to June in just one second, but I want to share just a couple of thoughts about politics, because that's, with the election just behind us, that's obviously on people's mind. Tyler, if you could pull up the slides on politics in the suburbs. I mostly just want to point to some great resources for all of our listeners out there. Next slide. The Pew Research Center, where Richard Fry is from, has done some fabulous work on our website. But as soon as this program is done, we will have a story about this session as well as a list of resources from this session. I believe there's 5 different reports that have been done by the Pew Research Center that we will have links for you there, covering a lot of good different aspects of the rural, urban, suburban divides. But talking politically, next slide. This is showing us that what we know, the urban core is mostly blue, mostly Democratic. Next slide. The rural counties are increasingly red, increasingly Republican. Next slide. And the suburban ones, that's where the tug of war is. That's something that we've seen really play out in the last few election cycles. Next slide. Pew also has some good data on looking at specific issues such as the gap between urban, rural, and suburban on things like same-sex marriage. This is showing the difference among Republicans. Next slide. And this is showing among Republicans, you can see that there's they are still in favor. They had a warmer view of Donald Trump than a cool view of him, but the divide between rural is much starker than the divide between suburban and urban. Suburban and urban are basically the same. Rural is 10 points different. And final slide. Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report has done some fabulous work on this topic this year. This is a story. We'll include a link for this one, but just talking about the realignment of the suburbs in 2020 and beyond.